two examples. Just so in case you aren't aware, this gentleman happens to have a hotel in LA, which is an old apartment building, and it's got 4,500 five-star reviews. It's in the top 10 hotels in Los Angeles. And he's created some really unique experiences based on things like a popsicle hotline and all this stuff. The hotel is an old apartment building with no room service, no restaurant, and no elevators. So he's very interesting. The other gentleman had some really interesting experiences as well. So let's go to the next slide. I did something here. 1 second. There we go. So good morning. We have our featured book. Maybe Jeff can talk about it.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll introduce our guests here in just a moment, which are Wolfgang Kohler and Andy Campbell. And you can see their smiling faces in their book, Stay in the Bay. And of course, today is the What About After Sales show. And, you know, funny thing is when we were looking through the videos, as we'd said to them earlier when we were talking before we started, finding videos on after sales really isn't an easy thing. And but then again, you start thinking about great customer experiences, and frankly, that's what everything is about, if you ask my opinion, and of course Ian's as well. So Stay in the Bay is definitely worth reading, and today we have a giveaway, and to any of our viewers today that post the most well, to our viewer that posts the most insightful question, we're going to be, well, actually not us, our guests are going to provide a hardcover copy directly to you, just as a thank you for being like so insightful. And then a couple other books we have here, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And of course, in business, we're always talking to strangers, and hopefully that turns into something where you never lose a customer again by Joey Holman. So turn any sale of lifelong loyalty. And our famous disclaimer. The opinions of our guests are that of our guests, not necessarily of us, but this is just our covereth of our behinds, just in case something's very, very, very interesting.
I feel the pressure on it.
Exactly. So, as I said, today's the after sales show. You've got Ian Nethercott, my co-host, our chief technology officer, chief video officer, and me, the looks. So thanks for joining us.
All right.
We're in trouble. So today we have our two guests today are Andy Campbell and Wolfgang Kohler, who, very interesting, call them automotive after-sale consultants. To my understanding, they share the roles of co-CEO, co-president, co-technology officers, co-writer, co-everything of firing on all cylinders automotive consulting in Waterloo, Ontario. Andy, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you first.
Absolutely. Good morning. First of all, thanks very much for having us. It's kind of cool to do these. A little bit about myself. 25, 30 years ago, started at a BMW dealership. Interesting first day. It's written in the book of how I started. I got very lucky to have an owner who taught me all aspects of the business. So within a 20-year career with him, I did everything from service manager to parts manager, pre-owned manager, new car sales manager, general manager of five of the dealerships. And then he did a horrible thing to me. He sold them, which was crushing. Professionally for me, was absolutely crushing that he sold them all. I went and did a short stint with a company called 180, which is automotive sales software, and had an interesting experience traveling across Canada. It's where I met my next set of business partners, a man and wife. I was asked by Volkswagen to go in and help them. They were struggling a little bit. They said I was kind of the business piece that was going to help them, but I didn't realize how much they were going to help me. So I became a partner of that Volkswagen dealership. and we had a lot of success because I had the business, and they taught me over 10 years how to do it, how to have a better culture within the dealership, and how to care more about your employees than I think I did in the first 20 years of my career. And that 10 years was the most gratifying for me, owning that dealership. But we won Wolfsburg Crest 10 years in a row. We won the Volkswagen Gold Pin Award, which is handed out to very few dealers across the world. And it was the most fun I ever had. And we had a really good thing because we concentrated on our culture and our people. So I thank them all the time for how much they taught me in the last 10 years of my career. We sold that in 2017. Thought retirement was the answer. Bored the hell out of me. Uh, Finally got back together with Wolfgang. We said we would always write a book, and we would go into consulting to try and help after sales, because the training seems to lack in after sales. And we've been doing it for 2 years, having an absolute blast doing it.
Fantastic.
Terrific. It's very interesting. One thing I really picked out of what you got there was the owner took you under his wing and taught you all these things. And perhaps maybe something that's missing these days is the fact that owners now tend to be in a C-suite somewhere, and they leave that up to somebody else to mentor people. And of course, to have somebody have a piece of the store is in Canada, of course, is getting smaller and smaller. But thank you very much, and I'm sure we would have crossed paths in our BMW days as well. So, Wolfgang, it's your turn. Please tell us a bit about yourself and what Andy didn't tell us about your company.
Ah, thanks, guys. Again, thanks for having me. We're really we were really excited to be on this show. Myself, when I was 15, and I'm a lot older now, we had a neighbor that owned or was a manager of a Canadian Tire store, and my dad spoke to him, and I got a job there in the parts department. I remember the day that my first day in the parts department, my dad dropped me off at the store. There was probably about 50 people sitting outside waiting for the store to open. My dad turned to me and said, "Don't embarrass me." I stuck on my clip-on tie and I went into the parts department. And those 50 people were all parts customers at that time. Everybody worked on their own car. So by the end of the day, I had people throwing starters at me and alternators and diagnosing their own stuff and telling me this was the wrong part. And I gave them this. And regardless, I stayed with the business for 35 years. So from Canadian Tire, I went to BMW, and that's where I met Andy. And I worked in after sales. I was a service advisor, a warranty administrator, became a service manager, after sales manager, did all that. And then, like Andy said, they sold the store, and I ended up working for one of my customers who ended up buying a Mercedes-Benz store. So I went to Mercedes-Benz in an after sales manager position again. And then things started happening. I started to learn a lot about lean manufacturing processes and being obsessive about tech time. Technicians, when they were leaving their bays, hanging around the parts department or talking to service advisors, I wasn't making money at that. So I decided I started to learn more about this stuff. I went to York University and learned lean operations excellence and things, different courses like that. Got as much as I could information about this stuff and started to apply them to after sales. So good, in fact, Daimler invited our dealer principal in Kitchener to build a store and duplicate these types of processes, not only in my department of after sales, but in sales, and duplicate what we did here in Canada in Switzerland. So we built this first store, a Mar 2020 store for Mercedes-Benz in Switzerland. And this was going to be the benchmark store for the rest of the world to follow over the next few years to build these types of stores. And I got the privilege of starting that thing from start to finish, hiring staff, building construction, being involved with that. And then again, when that stint was over after 3 years, I came back to Canada, and that's when Andy and I started to fulfill our dream year of starting this consulting business.
Terrific. Thank you. Very interesting. Nice to hear that you got to go to Switzerland Usually the manufacturer gets the dealer principal to get all the cool stuff, and the guys that did the work, not saying the dealer
Yeah,
principal
yeah.
didn't, they get to stay home and slog through the snow. Mind you, Switzerland's got snow too. So,
Yeah.
guys, thank you very much for joining us, and there's some very deep experience. Our first question is very interesting. If you ask a variety of dealers and people in the business about after sales, you probably get 10 or 15 different definitions. Of course, many of us in the dealer world refer to it as fixed ops or service or parts or something else. But in truth is, after sales is the fact. But so to start the show with a bang, why the heck don't dealers do a better job with after sales? And I'm just going to go to Wolfgang first because he's already warmed up from speaking.
Okay. Well, in my experience, I tend to find it's not as sexy in the back end. You know, it's not as much fun back there as it is selling cars. And coming from this luxury brand, I mean, it's so exciting to sell a new M5 or an SLS out of the showroom. But then something goes wrong with it or it needs it to come in for service. It's not that much fun. So dealer principal, I mean, it's like almost a necessary evil. I almost think that's back there. Um, it's it's complicated. There's a lot of processes involved. It's a lot of small details that and those small details can lead to big problems if you don't follow them properly. So I think that's really where um, it can be a little bit of a negative environment. Customers don't want to hang out with us. They have to bring their cars in, and they want it to be as smooth as possible. So I think that's maybe why dealer principals don't, they find somebody that they can kind of have back there and trust. And I think, they hope it runs well and go from there. Sometimes I've gone to dealer principals and they'd say, "How are you?" And I'd say, "Fine." Um, and then they go, "So what's going on?" I said, "Do you really want to hear this?" He goes, "Not really." And then, then they would just leave it to me. And then but sometimes, if they wanted to hear it, I once in a while they get brave and want to hear the whole story about what we're waiting for, problems we're experiencing with cars or whatever. They'd go, "Well, I'm sorry I asked," and then they leave you alone, and you never see them for a month.
Well, it's very funny, having a little bit of time in that field. I always got to laugh because the cars you saw coming into service on the flat deck, 70% of the time were new 7 Series and new S classes.
Got a
And
question. We got a question there, Jeff. When you're done, sorry, go ahead.
oh, not a problem at all. Actually, I just wanted to comment that that's the time that they really appreciate after sales is when
Yeah,
that darn car stopped in the middle of the intersection and
yeah,
the guy goes by in the Civic laughing at them. But Troy brought it here that he said to find a lot of dealers, especially they're generational, come up on the sales side. Definitely agree. In his experience, fixed and after sales leaders don't tend to have an inclination to move into sales either. Can you maybe address that, Andy, and then we'll get you to answer the question too.
Well, that's the way I was going to answer the question, to be honest with you. There's truly a lack of understanding in after sales. And it's a lot to do with who do we make general managers? How do we bring them up? How do we show them the sex appeal of the dealership? And it just tends to be the sex appeal really ends up being the sales department. Because if we look at this from the manufacturer's point of view, where are the incentives? Where are the big money? Where's the big money? It's usually in the new car department, right? So there's lots of these sexy, incentives that come in from the manufacturer, not so much, I hate to say the back end, but the after sales side of the business. And we find this a lot because we do a lot of work with dealer principals. Because a lot of the work we do is actually understanding the KPIs. There's a million different KPIs out there, but it's understanding what they mean and actually how do I change those KPIs. So a lot of our work initially is done getting the dealer principals to understand some of the concepts and what's behind changing and making KPIs better. So I completely agree with Troy and the fact that we just don't have experienced people getting to levels to run after sales department.
Is this changing as we look at the shift towards used cars? Because we've had a number of shows recently, and I attend a show every week where it's basically there's a big move towards used cars just because of new car availability. You think that's going to shift?
What has to shift, Ian, because and we notice this a lot, is people are starting to have to focus on after sales because we've got to find places to make money. And we have a lot of dealers we've had 2 dealers last month that turned their most profitable month ever in their company's history. We were locked down and they're still turning a profit because they're starting to concentrate on after sales. And yeah, used car departments are having a big part of it because people are starting to have to do off make, off brand vehicles, right? And
What's your opinion on the electric shift? I mean, we're going to have an electric show next week with a bunch of heavy hitters, but as we move to electric cars as a portion of sales in general, and I guess after sales, how's that going to impact the after sales piece, do you think?
well, and Wolfgang, you can chime in anytime. I don't think it's going to have that as quick. Of course, it's going to have an impact because I don't believe they're going to have as much maintenance required. But do revenue streams open up elsewhere, and the dealerships start looking at different revenue streams to bring into their company? We have a lot of businesses right now getting very heavily in detail and looking at everything they sublet out and finding ways of how do I get rid of those sublet and stop paying people the money and do things myself internally and bring this money into the dealership. We have a couple of really strong dealers that have really started to take a look at their after sales department for the first time and realize that they can make a lot of money at it. So will it change? 100%. I think it's going to change quite a bit. Is it going to hurt us? I think it's going to hurt after sales a bit, but where there's a problem, there's usually creativity and a way to make money in a different way.
Right.
To speak to that, I knew of a store, and it's been good comments so far this morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much. But where they had I think they had about 20 bays in the back, and the only way you could be a journeyman in their store is you had to have your glazier license, so that you could install windows in your bay, and that was just their shop policy. Within so many months of starting with them, you had to get your license, and then they would call windshields, and this is in Calgary where we have a fairly high turnover of windshields in our cars. As I'm looking out the window. They're cleaning the streets today, all the gravel. Jeff, you'll know about that. But yeah, and they would every 10th car or whatever it was got a new windshield, but it was done in the bay before it left, just as it would be an oil filter or whatever. And that was just a great way for them to actually get that extra penetration as well, because they weren't increasing their unit count. They were keeping the same unit count, but they were doing more lines and more dollars per RO in that shop.
For those that don't understand Alberta, glass insurance is more money than collision insurance.
Yes, it's a challenge here, but it is interesting. But it's the after sales has always been an interesting one, and I think one of the lessons we can learn in the car business is from the restaurant world. There's a fantastic video out there of a trainer that's in the restaurant world who has broken it down to say that you're not a loyal customer till you've been in our restaurant 3 times. And so they have a policy in this restaurant that as soon as the server finds out you've never been in their restaurant before, they have a different colored napkin they give you. They have a special appetizer sampler you get. And as soon as everybody in the restaurant sees that special colored napkin, they're all over you like you're the best thing in the world. Then they give you a 10% or a 50% discount for your next visit. And then as soon as that's presented, they know you're in for your second visit. And again, you get a different colored napkin. And as soon as they see that, the chef's over, the owner's over, the general manager's over, everybody's over to see you and thank you and all the kind of stuff in the world. And then once they have you in their restaurant for the 3rd time, they know that they've started the journey. But they have an actual process from I know this is your first visit to I now know you're on your 3rd visit, and we can now treat you as a regular customer. And it's a scientific process. It's not, I hope they get Bill today because he's really good. which is in the car business what we do, right? Oh, you're sending your mom in? Tell him to ask for a bill because he's our only good guy. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
the case at all.
Yeah. Now, if they were in the car business after the third visit, they'd just be ignoring you.
Right?
It's funny, Barry. We get this, so we do a lot of phone training with service advisors, and we'll
Yeah.
do mystery shopping with dealers, and we'll usually ask the dealer, "Okay, we're going to mystery shop. You know, who don't you want us to get?" And everybody instantly will come up with an answer. "Oh, I don't want you to get Mark. You can't. I hope you don't get Mark." And then we'll usually turn around and say, "Can you tell me why they're answering phones at your dealership? If you're hoping like mad, we don't get them right now on the phone." And we continue to let it happen.
It is, and we do a fair bit of work as well, and this isn't with that this platform is not for that, but maybe we can chat later. But we also find a lot of where we will ask a service manager, general manager, whatever the case may be, how many people a month leave their service department due to no longer castle compliant or whatever the case may be, and they do not have a clue what that number is. They do not know how many people are leaving their department. They don't even have a concept of it.
Sorry,
Like,
I don't know how to help.
you know, up front you can say, well, we do this many leads and we have this conversion, so we're probably this and we're probably that. But in the back, they don't have a clue.
Yeah.
So it's alarming that there's so much traffic back there. There's so much opportunity, and it's just spilling over the top of the glass, and nobody seems to care about it.
Wolfgang, did you have any thoughts on that question?
On the question of the retention question.
No. Why do you feel that dealers don't do a better job in after sales?
Oh, like more like I said, it's just that their focus is more on the front end. It's just not a sexy part of the business, but it is. Um, I think too, it's part of the training of the people to make sure that we get the right people back there. From the management on down and understanding what that big picture is. How everybody in after sales, I mean, there's many departments in after sales and understanding, all these processes that fit into after sales. And that starts from the very beginning, from the appointment process onto the service reception process and understanding what we're trying to accomplish. So many people, we ask these questions in training when we're talking to a customer on the phone, what's your objective on the phone? Well, when we tell them your objective is you want them to come in, you want them to book an appointment and you want them to come in. And when you were talking to a client on the phone, and we give them tools and techniques on how to do that, they really don't have a focus. They don't understand how to quote a service. They don't understand how to talk about, what the customer's needs are and understand how to book a proper appointment. You've heard the old adage, many people, at 8 o'clock in the morning, there is, 30 people at the counter or 20 people at the counter, customers, and there's only 3 service advisors. Well, how are we going to service all these people? By the time they even leave and get their cars booked in, they're already upset because, it took them an hour to check in their car, and they got to get to work. It's things like that that we try to have a very very properly thought out, laid out process where people are in control. And that's what we're looking for, and that's what we do in our training. And I think that's what a lot of dealers don't realize, all those concepts back there. There was a time, I'd say a year and a half ago, a dealer principal phoned me and said, "Hey, can you come to my house?" And he's been a dealer principal for many years with many dealerships. So I went to his house, and he really wanted to know what these KPIs meant. I don't know what hours per RO means. I don't know what, productivity means. I don't know what efficiency means. I don't know what this stuff means. And I just need someone to finally explain it to me. And I sat on his kitchen table and showed him what this stuff was. And it was an eye opener for me that they really didn't know and were never able to ask anybody.
Well, that's interesting. Interesting. I had a question here or a comment from John. On the subject of telephone skills, I once had a GSM tell me that they would sell more vehicles if they didn't pick up the phone, which I think is kind of crazy, but not surprising. I mean, in my past life I set up call centers, and we had a dealership that had 2 locations, and they had salespeople answering inbound phone calls. And I'm sure this happens sometimes with service writers, but essentially we replaced one of the stores with a BDC that was trained in a process front to back to do this. And then we compared the numbers with the dealer principal the next month against the store where the salespeople were answering the phone. And then quickly the salespeople were no longer answering the phone because it was pretty clear they weren't very good at it. But the thing about it, which is interesting, is, to your point, lack of understanding. But more importantly, from a customer-centric point of view, and I worked for DealerFX in a past life as well, where they're trying to move appointments online, they're trying to do that. One of the biggest things that was an eye-opener for me when I was doing training was someone had booked their appointment online, but before we implemented a process, the people would show up and the service writer wouldn't even know who that person was. So they'd have to look it up. Did you have an appointment today? So that's very interesting. So I guess my question is, on the pandemic side, do you think it's changed the way we sell and service vehicles?
You're asking me?
Yeah. Well,
okay. Yeah, I think. I mean, like Andy said, we've had many dealerships that have had very, very successful times in after sales. And those people that have embraced, embraced the situation, they kind of look at it and they say, okay, well, they ask themselves the questions and say, why aren't people coming in? Their cars are sitting at home. And then we look at things, let's show them what we're going to do. People are concerned and afraid of what's happened during the pandemic. And how are, they don't want to come in, so they're nervous about coming in. So let's develop a valet service. How are we going to develop the valet service? Let's tell people what's going to happen when they get their car picked up, how it gets desanitized or sanitized, so it gets cleaned and then disinfected and so on and so forth. When am I going to bring the car back? What is that communication? So they don't have to leave their home to come into the dealership. And the other option is, a lot of people have been using the Dropbox or the, a lot of these electronic Dropbox systems that they have out there right now. People have been using those. And, explain to customers what happens when their cars. And some dealers have done great jobs on YouTube videos and uploaded them and said, this is what's going to happen when we get your car. This is what's going to happen. And it puts people at ease. So they've really, during the pandemic, the people that have done these things have done really well. And others sit there and go, well, nothing's happening. And we just sit there and the door is open and nobody comes. Well, you can see the big difference from one extreme to the other.
Interesting. We have a question from Troy. We see analytics that show 90 to 95% declined added service by service advisors for some products, but not all. Some products close at 90% acceptance. The gap is where the money can be made either correctly pricing the service and properly sales training the advisors. Dealers also need to realize that service advisors are in fact a sales role. Wolfgang mentioned that DPs need to better understand the KPIs, but they also need to learn that after sales is still sales. What's your opinion on that? Whoever wants to answer.
Andy, you want to answer that one?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of just still reading the question a little bit. One of the problems we struggle with service advisors is how to quote and how to build value within a quote. Example, we all have, let's say, Volkswagen, a 60,000 kilometer service is a large service. And there's a lot that we do on that 60,000 kilometer service, but what we typically tend to say is, hey, it's $580 and includes an oil filter change. And then they list a couple other items. We need to teach them how to sell, right? So the comments in here that they're salespeople is 100% correct. That oil filter should be the last thing out of a service advisor's mouth. The service advisor should say, we do a 30-point inspection on your car. We check it for recalls. We change spark plugs. We do, a cabin air filter. We wash your vehicle. Oh yeah, and by the way, it includes an oil and filter change. If we're not doing it this way, we wonder, people say dealers are really expensive to maintain. Well, no shit. We just told you that's a $500 service. And the first thing the customer hears is what they wanted to hear, which is an oil change. So they get off the phone and say, holy shit, the dealer's $500 for a filter change. Change the process, change the way you sell and build value first, because the customer is going to listen to you until you say oil change. You have their attention. The second you say oil change, they're on to something different. So the comments in here from Troy, like I really like 100%. We've got to realize that these sales consultants are truly salespeople, and we have to teach them how to be consultants as well, because we have a lot of training talks about what's a 0 to 4 year car look like in service. What does a 4 year to 8 year old car look like in service, and what are you becoming? And what about after 8? You better be a consultant by now, and you better have their trust, because now we're probably not going to do everything the car is going to need. We're going to do it in bits and pieces to gain their trust, right? So yeah, a lot of time needs to be spent on selling skills and how do we sell, and how, because they don't know. We usually stick these people on the service counter and say, hey, there's the phone. There's the pad that you make appointments. Have fun.
So, Andy, I have a question for you on that topic. I'll make you a bet that you were able to track what service advisors did a good job of presenting that service to people, to the Volkswagens, to the customers that turned it down and just did an oil change and came in after warranty with problems.
Oh, well, we track it a lot of ways. So one of the things we do with the dealer is we'll go into a dealer and say, can you run me a list of your system and tell me how many one of the filter changes you did in the past 30 days. We just did one last week. So the number came back at like 140 oil changes. So the next question we asked was how many of those should have been scheduled maintenances? And it was staggering. It was 82% could have been scheduled maintenances on the car. When we mystery shopped the dealer, they didn't even bother talking about it. The service advisor was selling just the oil filter change because that's all he thought the big service was, right? And so what we can make, teaching them how to sell is the way to do this, but you can't sell something you don't believe in, right? It's impossible. So you need to teach these service advisors, have them go stand with a technician and complete a big service on a car. Just stand there and watch everything a technician does, because technicians are remarkable. All the little extra things they do on a car and the care they take. And as soon as the service advisor gains the confidence of what you're doing, they can then sell it. That was a long-winded answer to a short question.
How many dealer principals have you ever heard say technicians are remarkable?
Oh, don't even get me started on this topic, because
Mind you, how many dealer principals have you heard say salespeople are remarkable?
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, tell us about your biggest after-sales horror story. Wolfgang, I'll throw it back to you.
Well, I, I mean, this is Andy and I talked about this a couple days ago when we got your questions, because we go, we could write a whole book on horror stories, so I don't know where to begin. So, I mean, we can, is it as a manager, when you come into and you open up the dealership, I've been in there, and you come in and you see all your customers' cars that are parked in the compound because they didn't pick them up the night before, and they're all sitting on blocks and somebody stole all their wheels. So now you have to call all those customers back and say, hey, you know what? We had a break-in on the compound and they stole all your wheels. I've had that. We had at another dealership I worked at, we had tire storage in an outside building, and they broke in there and stole all their summer wheels. So you have to figure out which wheels are gone and make an insurance claim for that. I mean, these are horror stories because they trust you with their vehicle, or they trust you with their wheels. So for me, that's got to be, those are the worst things that I've ever had to deal with. I mean, the other stuff is, if a customer, I've had customers that had 50,000 K on a ML Mercedes. I remember one time, and they've never changed the oil. Now they need an engine. They've never done a service on the car since they bought it. So, that type of stuff, but you manage those on a day-to-day basis and what happens. But every day is different. It's like I always say, it's like bits and bytes. You reach in and pull out a handful. You never know what combination you're going to get. So.
Yeah, very true. I got an X5 that somebody didn't change oils on with the 4.4 twin turbo, so I know that one
Oh
well.
yeah, I know. And then they blame you that they didn't. Nobody told them they've ever needed an oil change, and you know.
I actually blame my tech for not finding it. Andy, how about you?
Oh, I've got multiples. I mean, the biggest horror story I've ever had is when we were robbed at the BMW store. I had spent 2 weeks buying back, 2 weeks, 2 months buying back an M3 for a customer, his original M3, and he wanted me to go locate it, find it, and buy it back. So we bought it back for him. We got it into the dealership, and that night, a group came into the sales department, overwhelmed our sales staff while three other people were stealing cars out of the back of the dealership. And I got out with the M3, a 5 Series, and a brand new 750 BMW that we were PDIing. Unfortunately, the M3 didn't have any oil in it, so it made it down the expressway about 2 miles and the engine blew up. The 750, I phoned the police and I remembered that it had the GPS tracking device on it. So they called me and they finally found the car and they phoned me and said, "Hey, Andy, do you mind if we keep looking at this car for a couple of days? We'd like to see who stole the car." Yeah, sure. Okay, that seems okay to me, and have it for 2 days. They phoned me back, said, you can come get the car. We couldn't locate the people, so your car is going to be taken to the impound, which is underground. About 2 hours later, I got a phone call that the 750 must sit a little bit too high on their flatbed, because as they tried to take it underground, they took the complete roof off the top. So that would be the horror story I would have in that. But again, there's all kinds. We see different things every day in dealers. They're not horror stories. I just think they're opportunities.
Summer
I
horror
wish you could have
stories.
told me that.
What's
You know,
that?
I could have
I
changed
said
the
summer horror
question.
stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I should have changed your biggest opportunity horror story.
Oh,
So question, when you're training dealers and you're training their staff, and obviously these horror stories hopefully don't happen every single day, how do you train them to deal with a customer that they've got to call on? Let's just say that's their car. Like I'll use an example. When I sold cars, I sold a used S2000 to a nice young lady, and she brought it back to a dealership to have I think it was rims done or something. And they threw the keys to some young lot kid, and he wrapped it around a post. And essentially, what happened is she refused. She was a pretty bright lady. She refused to claim it on ICBC. She said she insisted that they fix it on their dime, and she also insisted that they fire the lot kid. So it was kind of an interesting situation. But how do you train a service manager or service writers or just general staff to deal with these challenging situations? Like, what is your advice?
we have a quote that we use in our training. And the quote says, "Lies are easily forgotten. The truth is always remembered." So be honest. Talk to your customers. Tell them what happened. Be honest with them about it. You'll get a lot farther. Start making up excuses and lies, and you'll get caught every time. And then you're just going to make a bad situation even worse. So that's a lot of our training is about the honesty of it and the relationship you have with the customer. Make sure it's an honest relationship. Wolfgang, anything?
Yeah, just another thing. I mean, we often tell people is don't be afraid to say I'm sorry. you know, I've been in personally in situations in my time as being a manager, and something has gone off the rails, and I look at it, I look at the customer, and they're yelling at me, and they're upset, obviously, and I look them in the eye and say, "You're absolutely right. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry it happened." And you'll see their shoulders drop down, and you'll see them take a deep breath, and you're not like Andy said, you just got to tell them the truth. If something happened, it happened. And, whether you banged into you had an accident, or or whatever happened, it's important to just fix it, tell them you're sorry, and stuff happens, and come up with a solution. And the other thing, you got to learn from the situation what happened. You've got to get everybody involved, and how did this occur, and analyze what your process is and what happened, and where and how it fell off the rails, and develop something so it doesn't happen again. And that's really, I think, what a manager's job is trying to figure out a way that this doesn't happen again.
Well, the two hardest things that I ever discovered with service advisors was with a customer. One was getting to go out and do a walk around of the car with the customer when they were there, and two was like what you just said, to just say, look, we screwed up.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem throughout the business. Nobody ever does anything wrong, and yet that's all we do.
Yeah.
So, any other questions from our other guests or attendees?
Actually, Jeff, I have a quick question for Andy, if you don't mind. Andy, I'm intrigued in kind of your comments earlier on. I'm going to take you back to kind of when we first started, and you'd commented on.
I'm old, Barry, so take careful how far back we.
Well, no, not that far back, because I'm not young either.
But you have hair.
Is your comment about how things are going to change with electric vehicles and the maintenance of them? Because some schools of thought feel that as long as they still have brakes, suspension, and some of those components, we're going to be okay as far as our maintenance. We don't really make any money on LOF anyway, so no one's really going to miss the oil filter going away. So in your opinion, what is going to be probably the biggest drop? Because you'd mentioned there's going to be a drop. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there's going to be a drop in the maintenance as we move into the EV world. What do you think we're going to miss the most? Is it the flushes? Is it that kind of stuff? Or where do you see the drop?
For sure. I mean, there's a whole bunch of shifts going on right now. I was asked years ago. I remember we were out somewhere and we were doing an engagement, and somebody asked me, electric cars are going to change so quickly by 2021, everything will be electrified. And it's like, well, we're not going to get there because we've got a big infrastructure to build first, right? We're getting there. I get it, but we're getting there, and it's coming. I honestly don't know, to be honest with you, Barry. I don't know. I think we will lose certain things with these electric cars that we do make money on, because I think the maintenance of the engines is going to be less. I think the brakes are still going to be there, but the other fear, and the reason that we talk to our dealers a lot about, you have to find other avenues for revenue. It's not just the electric car, but it's the amount less people are driving, that I'm not 100% sure that's going to change for a long time. But I think people are going to be driving for a lot less going forward in the year. And that's had a dramatic impact on our dealers in the last year. Is these cars that used to go 30, 40,000 kilometers a year are now doing 15 or 7,500. So when you do get your customer in, you better be one-stop shopping for everything. And I don't know what that is, Barry, on the electric car, what the one-stop shopping is yet for the electric car. I don't think there's enough history on it yet. I'm probably going to join in next week, because I heard Ian say he's got some power hitters next week.
Oh yeah.
On the electric car, so I'll probably be joining in on that just to get their take on it, to smarten myself up about it. But there's lots of shifts going on right now that our dealers better start looking at every way they can to make a dollar.
Because the interesting thing, and I have my own personal opinions on this, but the interesting thing I see is the mobile service is going to be more practical, because you're no longer on an electric vehicle. You're not worried about the oil disposal. You're not worried about it coming safely out of the car. What do you do with it in the mobile van and all that kind of stuff? The opportunity to lift it up, take a tire off, check what you need to check, fix what you need to fix, put it all back on again. tap the guy's credit card and drive away is going to be much smoother than lifting it up, spilling oil on his driveway, having to deal with the environmental side of all this kind of stuff. I think there's going to be an opportunity for a guy in a van, and maybe instead of 28 bays out back, you've got 28 vans driving around the city, and doing the maintenance that way. So there might be opportunity.
Well, I'm fully
there's gonna be
expecting somebody to pop up offering an after-sales product to recondition batteries. I have no technical knowledge of it, but I don't know how many people do it for cell phones, but I can see somebody having something where they come into your service and you plug their car in while you're doing their brakes or tires, and it drains their battery, reconditions it, and recharges it.
Yep. Give it a deep cycle clean.
There you go.
Might even put nitrogen in it, Jeff.
Well, there's actually a couple comments from Troy, and I'm privy to some of it because one of my clients is Yonker Honda. Yonker Nissan just was basically sold that franchise, but they're putting a Tesla store in. And I was talking to the sales team, and they're converting most of that facility to service. So there will be a sales component, but they also did this recently in Richmond across from the Costco. So the Tesla is starting to look at, dealership locations as they expand, but most of it's service. Like they have a location right near where I live. They don't have enough service base. So what they've been doing is buying other facilities nearby to do the service on the vehicles. Service is still required. And I actually asked Tesla Store West Vancouver about this because my impression was it was an annual service, but they do have a battery fluid service, which is quite expensive that they didn't want to talk about that. I think it's 4 years in ownership, but there's still money there. It's just they're not quite sure how to generate that money. They're not quite sure on accessories. They're not quite sure on extended warranty. We're going to have a gentleman next week on extended warranty for electric cars, for batteries. They don't really have the business office process down. So there's definitely some opportunity there. So I guess the last question was, what's the biggest opportunity for ROI for dealers who maybe their traditional bread and butter service is drying up because of mileage, and they obviously are going to have less customers coming in? How do you recommend they deal with that and make more money?
Wolfgang, you or me?
Well, you go ahead first, and then I'll let you.
I mean, the big thing when we read this question earlier, we talked about ROI. Our whole training process is focusing on time. And every day your technician walks through that back door and he hands you a gift. And the gift he gives you is 8 hours of his talent. And we focus with dealers on maximizing that talent. How do you have stores that run at 65% productivity? How can you have that? And how are you wasting that much of a technician's day? And we spend a lot of time focusing on that time. And although we talked about this earlier, although services went longer this time, and we're seeing the customer maybe a bit less, we have dealers who are very profitable right now because their focus is now on that technician's time and treating it like a gift. Now, we all know they stand too long in parts. I get it. Okay, so we have ways to fix that. Are we pre-authorizing? We have a strategy for the shop supplies for them? What are all the strategies that keep that technician in their bay? And that's what we need to focus on. That's where the biggest ROI is. We see it every day with dealers. Once we start to get them in this mindset of just being absolutely crazy about a technician's time and not letting any of it leak out of a bucket, that's where they're getting big after sales returns. We have an exercise we do. They've got to sit in the dealership at 3 different hours throughout the day and record for us every single time a technician leaves a bay, and then report back to us as why did they leave the bay? Because you're wasting. I can't stress this enough. I honestly believe this. Technicians They hand us this wonderful gift every day, and we can screw it up by having improper scheduling, by not having enough work for them there. Why is our first appointment at 8 o'clock in the morning and our technician starts at 8 o'clock in the morning? So that can't jive, right? The technician's supposed to start work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And what they come back with after this exercise is it's usually it's a great phone call for us, because there's been a lot of light bulbs that have went off with dealers as to why their technicians are losing money, not of their own. It's not their fault. We're just not doing a good job of managing that gift we get every day. Wolf, like, anything to add?
Yeah, and yes, I mean, and that's really, I mean, we still see a lot of dealers that are booking, 10 days out, 2 weeks out, 6 weeks out. And that's, when we look at that, and we all know that there's, technicians are just so easy to find. So you really have to optimize the time that we have with the technicians that we do have. So when Andy was saying, if you're booking, we have dealerships that'll book 2 weeks out and they'll have 65% productivity. These technicians are standing around and they run out of work at 3 o'clock. Where is that? Where are we losing that time? And that's really where we analyze a lot of these things. And when we turn these processes around from everywhere, from the start to having, and it's simple stuff, parts delivered to technicians, how are we communicating to service advisors, how are we pre-selling parts, how are we organized ahead of time? It's interesting. We've gone through a process where, we watch a dealership and a customer makes a call into the dealership, and it's, a common problem that everybody in the whole dealership knows it's wrong with this model, this particular car. And we phone and the customer comes in or on the phone, and they say, well, I have this problem with my car. The person making the appointment goes, I know what that is, but they make the appointment. So then the customer shows up and the service advisor looks and hears the customer's symptoms again from that customer as they write up the RO. And the customer explains to them and say, hey, I know what's wrong with that car. And, and the service advisor already knows. So the car comes into the shop, and before the technician brings it in, he reads the RO and says, well, I know what's wrong with this thing, brings it up on the hoist, brings it in the parts department, and the parts department says, yeah, I know what's wrong with that car. And then they go to the back and they find out they don't have the part. How do all these people know what's wrong with the car? And then we send the customer home again. And we say, yep, we ordered that part for you. And that's really, we find this often because we're not prepared for the customer coming in. And that's, again, when we talk about wasting time, how much should that cost the dealership? And it's something that, there is no, we calculate all these things out and how much they've really lost when they lose these customers, and these customers have to return for a repeat visit because we weren't prepared for them.
Or they order the parts and nobody picks them up.
Yep.
They're in inventory.
Yep, they stay there as well. And there's so many things that we go through on a lot of these things, and how to organize things. We organize the parts department. We talk about parts departments. Why do you have $1 million worth of parts when you get 2 stock orders a day? Well, when your manufacturer is delivering and they have a 98% fill rate to the dealer, why is our parts inventory so high? I don't know. We hear the same answer all the time because we've always done it that way. And we hear those things often when we talk about a process of how you do things, and how they book appointments and things like that. It's because we've always done it that way. And it's something we hear constantly, is a constant theme in the dealerships we work with, is we've always done it that way. But when we start thinking them, and like Andy said, to become obsessive about the time the technician puts in, because there are production, there are productivity, and we have to maximize the use we have out of those techs, because there's not a lot of talent out there to backfill any empty bays. So we have to maximize that stuff, and that's really where I think the opportunity is.
Ian, one of the things we do with the service managers is sit down with them and have them calculate the gross profit. What is the gross profit percentage for each of your technicians, including your apprentices, to realize which people are we making the money from? So once we realize this, why do we have our top paid technicians doing things that are discounted or doing tire repairs? Well, now we're taking a discount, something we're not making money at, and now we're making it even worse, because I'm going to put the guy with the least chance of making me money on those jobs. And that's how we have to think, right? We only get so much time every day from a technician. We've got to maximize that gift, because I love technicians. I've struggled my whole career finding them. When I found a good one, man, I was making that guy or girl as happy as I could to keep them.
And when you think about it, we just to add on that, Andy, often what we do is when a parts manager loses $1,000 alternator out of the parts inventory, the GM or the dealer principal is so upset with that parts manager, we lost the $1,000 part. But man, we lose more than that every day in the workshop of time. And that's our time inventory. And that's really what we focus on in our book is we talk to people about what is your inventory of time. So when you have technicians standing around, I mean, we're losing their time. They want to make money too. But we also need to focus on what we can do as a dealership and start serving our technicians from the service advisor's point of view, from the parts advisor's point of view, from all the support staff, including management. We're there to serve the technicians and make sure that they are staying productive. And we're not saying ruin the camaraderie in the workshop. That's important. But we also don't want them to disrespect their time because, like Andy said, it's a gift they give us every day, and we need to maximize that gift.
Oh yeah, I mean, I worked with a dealer group in I think it was not Miami, Orlando area. So it was a unique situation because they have a night shift and a day shift. So they do all the diesel work at night because they don't have time during the day. And I thought that was really interesting because they actually were looking for a solution to maximize. Now they had to staff it, like they had a parts guy working at 2 in the morning and stuff. It was kind of odd, but the other example that I use is a Toyota dealership in the small town of Beaverton, Oregon. They do 400 ROs a day in service. They have 3 teams of technicians plus 2 express oil changes. They are still servicing vehicles that were bought there over 20 years ago. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, I've never seen a Toyota store at this scale. They must have had 60 service bays. But what was interesting was that they were focused on it. They were really focused on how can we do these things. And the thing that's interesting when I compare them to dealers I work with, whether it be General Motors or Mitsubishi in Canada, and even Nissan stores, was I was training some service managers who didn't even understand basic service concepts. Like, how do I calculate what my effective labor rate should be? They had no idea, and they were in charge of it. So part of it's training, but part of it's just the fact that you're leaking out money, right? So what are you doing to do that? So I think that what I learned from it, doing it for quite a while across North America, was that you got to pick the problems and solve the ones that make a lot of sense. And I'll use another example. I happen to work with an Audi store here in town. They had an automated parts machine, which was, I'm sure, a massive cost. But the cool thing about this machine was you'd punch in a part. It would not only produce the part for you using some sort of automated mechanism, it would distribute the part that was the oldest one in inventory. So not only could it manage your inventory better, it managed the old stock. And I was blown away by that. I'm like, whatever this cost, it was probably worth it.
Hey, is there any way we could get that into sales consultants' heads so they don't pick the newest car in the lot? They actually won't pick the one that's been there the longest?
That's a pretty high bar.
Yeah, that's for darn sure, isn't that?
Any final thoughts? We're out of time.
It was a good show, guys.
Yeah, very good. Any final comments, Andy or Wolfgang?
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Anybody
really
wants to reach out to us or read our book, let us know and become obsessive about time. You'll make more money.
That is so true, and it's very funny. When I started to personally dig into service and the opportunities there, was mind-boggling. And like we say, we'll get dealer principals go to 20 groups, and they one of their favorite words is absorption rates. And they're all sitting there going, oh yeah, well, I'll get my service does 87%. Well, mine does 120. And then you ask them about hours per RO, and they go, lots.
So here's the Hey, Jeff, here's the thing about all these KPIs and books that come out from everybody. Until we get, I never compared myself to another dealer when I was a dealer principal. Never once. Because I truly knew that everybody's financial statements were different than everyone else's and we recorded information differently. So I took our staff and our management team and I taught them how to understand the KPI and then how do you make your own KPI better. That's what we have to focus more time on. Trying to compare ourselves to other dealers in these great big books of KPIs, we overwhelm our managers. Slow down, we all report things differently. Right?
Well,
Standardize the financial statement. Good luck with that, but if you could do that, you might be able to get farther.
and whenever they go to prepare things, they all doctor it anyways. So that way they don't get embarrassed in front of their friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, we're going to end it today. Thank you all very much. The winner of the book, without a doubt, in our eyes, is our good friend Troy Glenn. So, gentlemen, we'll get Troy's contact information for you, so you can send him a copy of the book. And Troy had some great comments and questions. Now, Barry, you were like a good runner-up. I got to tell you, as you always are.
I'm just not a good typer.
Exactly.
Well, hang on, Wolfgang. We better send Barry a book.
I think we should send Barry.
I'd appreciate that. Actually, I would. I'd like to read
Not
that.
a hard copy, though. He'll get a.
Yeah, send him it was just like I asked you guys for an e-copy, and it was this, what's an e-copy? With that, Ian, any final thoughts from your end?
No, I think we paid way too little attention to after sales, and Troy had an interesting thought and maybe a huge opportunity for dealers. If you're looking for someone to train your team that maybe could also join your team, would be someone who works in the hotel industry. I mean, it's an industry that's been badly impacted, but also, I mean, if you can elevate that customer experience, whether it be the fish philosophy or there's a bunch online, that makes a huge difference. And I think that's part of it. I mean, I always remember this dealer I worked with in Winnipeg. And I was training a service writer, and they had the oil change for life program. And all he could sell was oil changes. So I said to him, okay, so the dealer makes $0, and you're working for him. So in what universe does that make any sense to you? He goes, what do you mean? I go, well, that's not good job security when you're making them $0 every day. So you may want to fix that. You may want to understand and fix that problem. And part of it is just, and this is something I learned in sales years ago, write down the objections. Handle those objections, learn how to handle them. But more importantly, what we used to do at Dealer Facts, which I still think is very good, is we preface it with, listen, this is the factory required maintenance from the manufacturer. Start there. Pick your battles, but start there. And explain it to the customer. Don't just say, okay, it's an oil change, whatever, and chase them later. But what was interesting that I found as I trained service writers across North America was the good ones were good at having a conversation with the customer, whether it be an Audi service writer or one at Honda or an Nissan, it didn't matter. But a lot of them could have been a lot better if people had to just explain to them what they were doing wrong. Like, oil changes are not the answer.
I have to share something before we go here, and we talked about this in another show. I had the opportunity. I'm involved with a used car lot here, and we had a caddy there that I took into a big caddy store here. It's a Chevy truck and caddy dealer. And as you drove into service, they had 3 of these giant Hunter machines that you drove into the service bay, and it read your tire wear, it read your brake things. You know, we all know them, and they're beautiful. What are these things? $100,000 a piece, maybe even more. Drive in. I pulled up in the car. Some guys waving me forward to park. There was a service advisor at the front. Didn't talk to me. There were 6 little service kiosks in this drive-through. Nobody talked to me. I stood there for 15 minutes. I walked inside the building and got the receptionist who said, "Oh, they'll be out soon." And I waited. And the first service advisor at the front wouldn't talk to me. And when they came in, they said, "Oh, hi, you got your appointment. Okay, great, thank you, bye." Nobody mentioned anything. Didn't say, oh, by the way, our machine says your tires are bald, which they were. Oh, by the way, your brakes are squeaking, which they were. No. So the dealer spent all this money, and like you said, that because the staff is not engaged, they missed out on that.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's it. Thank you all very much. Great show, guys. Great show. That was really enjoyable. You guys had some tremendous insight. And of course, again, this will be going out on podcasts very soon. And of which we're going to make sure that Elon Musk gets this directly so you guys can get business out of Tesla too. And if you do, we want 10%.
Have a good week.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.